It's time for another Tackle HD Crappie Report. Today, professional angler Casey Scanlon has the latest from Lake of the Ozarks.
Hey everyone, Casey Scanlon here. It's time for a Tackle HD Crappie Fishing Report for December at Lake of the Ozarks. We're switching it up a little bit this week, talking about the crappie instead of the bass. And it's a great time to be here at Lake of the Ozarks and do a little crappie fishing. They are biting all over the lake. It's one of my favorite times of year to be on the water. So we're gonna go over a few of the ways that we're catching them, where to find them, and a few of the baits to throw out there at these fish to put that limit in your live well and get eaten right. So man, crappie fishing is one of my favorite things to do. So let's start with kind of the setup that we're using. I like to use a high vis line. This is Bass Pro Shops Crappie Max line. This is a great monofilament. 6 pound test is what I like. You can use 4, you can use 2, you could even use 8 if you want, but 6 to me, it's the right size and strength to catch these crappie and put them in the boat. So don't have to retie very much, but you can break off when you need to do so. You know, you get a lot of snags with an open hook on a crappie jig. So a lot of times you need a stronger line to either bend that hook or, sometimes just sacrifice it and break that jig off. So that 6 pound line works great. The high vis is real important because a lot of times those crappie bites are really soft, and the only way to detect them is to see that line kind of pop. So that 6 pound line is really good. So try that out. It's cheap. You get a bunch of it. Let's see how many yards are in here. 2,000 yards. So you could probably fish your entire crappie career off that one spool of line right there. And as far as the reels go, I'm using a small 6-gill reel. It really, you just want something that doesn't hold a ton of line, something small to fit the rod that you're using. As far as rod goes, that becomes really important actually. You want the right size and length to shoot underneath these boat docks. Lake of the Ozarks has a ton of boat docks, and these crappie love to hide underneath them. So in order to do so, you need to do what, to catch those fish a lot of days, what you need to do is shoot a jig under those docks. And what you do is you grab the jig and you have your rod in this hand, which I'm right-handed. So you got your rod in one hand, you pull that jig back, stretch that pole and make it bend, just like you have a fish on there. It's bending backwards towards you, and you simply release that jig. You point the rod where you want it, release that jig, and it's gonna shoot up underneath that boat dock. Something that takes a little bit of practice, but I'm gonna work on a few videos that show me actually shooting those jigs underneath the docks. With a little bit of practice and the right rod, it becomes super easy. So, the rod I like is a medium action rod, 6 foot in length. 6 foot, I've experimented with longer rods and shorter ones to see which one is better. 6 foot allows me to put that bait where I need it to most of the time. It's a good action and size, and catches a lot of crappie for me. So let's talk about where these fish are at and what baits we're using. So we're using the Pro Striker bait series for the most part. Some days we'll use a minnow. I personally don't use minnows because that means I got to go to the bait shop, and that also means I probably have minnows on my carpet. And a lot of days you don't need to do that. These fish are ready to bite when you find them, so we use a lot of soft plastics. When they're active and chasing, you can't really see that very good, so I'll put it against my sweatshirt. This Pro Striker 2-inch grub is really good. I like to rig the grub where the tail is pointed away from that hook so it doesn't catch. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. I'll rig it up. I like a 1/16 or 1/8 ounce head. I don't really experiment too much outside of that. Sometimes, we'll use 2 1/16 ounce heads, double up on the crappie jig, but that's usually only when I'm fishing vertical, which a lot of times I'm not doing this time of year. A lot of these fish are around brush piles. Some of them are on bluffs, but most of them are hanging around these deeper boat docks. The bigger schools of crappie love to get around these docks. Brush piles are good. Shade is very important, so a bigger dock is usually good, something with a swim platform. But with that grub, there's how I rig it. See how that tail is pointed downward and the hook points facing up? That way when you cast out, that tail doesn't latch onto that hook and kind of waste your cast. So that's a great one when the crappies are active. I love that white jig head. I don't have a whole lot of different kinds of jig heads as far as colors, but a white, a chartreuse, you can use unpainted jig heads if you want, and then this pink one works good for me sometimes as well. So Pro Striker grub is good. You see those crappie sitting above a brush pile. Now crappie love to suspend, and they usually will sit above the brush pile or underneath that dock. So a lot of times, let's say you have a brush pile and 20 foot of water. A lot of times those crappie will be spread out anywhere from 6 foot to 15 foot on that pile. They'll kind of sit around it and on top of it. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll count this down and just kind of swim it over the top of them, and those fish will come up and feed on that bait. But my favorite is the baby shad. Okay, the baby shad is just a real shad looking bait, very popular in the crappie world. And this kind of, you can see I'm not doing much besides holding it out there, and that tail is moving a lot. Okay, my hands are a little shaky apparently, but you can see the action that thing has. So I'm gonna rig that up, 1/8 ounce head if they're real deep, but 1/16 ounce is pretty much the size I'm using all of the time. The boat docks that we're looking for, a lot of them are on or close to the main lake. They have a lot of deep water around them. The dock may be in 30, 40 foot of water, but those fish are suspended in the shade, underneath the boats. Crossbars are really good on certain days. The live scope's really important for crappie fishing. It makes your life a lot easier. You can find those big schools of fish, and you can see where they're relating on the dock, and you can see where they move to once you catch a few. Usually the first few fish are very active, easy to put in the boat. So there's the baby shad rigged up. Super good bait. That's pretty much what I use 80% of the time, and it gets a ton of bites, especially this time of year. Another color that I like is this electric chicken. It's got a little bit of pink on it, got a little bit of green. When the water's dirty, I like that. And when it's clear, like it is right now, I love these more natural shad type colors. Let's talk about where to find them. So I love to target bluffs this time of year. There's, of course, the water's getting lower. It's been low for quite some time at Lake of the Ozarks, but these fish want to be around deep water. It's a nature of the crappie to want to suspend. So, bluffs are a naturally good place for those fish to hide out at. They can, vary their range of depth very easily, and they don't have to move very far. So when I'm looking at a bluff, I like a variation in the bluff, whether that's a rock slide, a brush pile, a piece of concrete or a pole or a pipe or anything running out off of the bank. A laydown is a perfect example. That laydown just gives them a piece of cover on that bluff to suspend. It's an isolated target, and some really big crappie can be caught around those isolated targets on bluffs. Of course, bluff ends, where that bluff ends, is a great spot for those crappie to set up. And it's even better if there's a brush pile or something around. So you're not gonna catch some of the numbers, but I feel like the size of those fish are usually better around, that wood cover and individual targets like that. The big schools of crappie seem to be located on or around the main lake. Secondary points are good. Channel banks back in these creeks. Just go in the creeks, look for a bigger dock, something with some shade on it, a swim platform. Brush is very important. A lot of the good crappie docks that I like have some brush around them, to hold those fish there, sometimes year round. So look for the big docks, look for brush piles, and then you got to use your electronics to find those schools of fish. Usually there's a lot of them. Sometimes there's 100 or more fish in a group. So they can be fairly easy to see on your side view, down view, or if you're fortunate enough to have the live scope, you just put your trolling motor down, start searching underneath those boat docks. Shine the transducer underneath those docks, look around and see what's underneath there. If I don't see a bunch of fish, I'm not fishing for them. The crappies will get real grouped together, real tight. They'll stack vertical, and they're very hard to miss when you get around a big group of them. So wave breaks, they have the cable systems on them. Those fish are holding around those right now. I caught some yesterday doing that. They were around some bigger docks on the main lake. We were fishing the lower end of the lake here where I live at about the 6 mile marker. So we were targeting those fish. Super clear water. They were suspended anywhere from 6 foot down to 20, And a lot of times the fish that are higher up in the water column seem to be more apt to bite. They're easier to catch. You don't have to let your bait sink down as much. So that's a great target. Another thing that starts happening this time of year is the jerkbait bite. So you can use that Tackle HD fiddlesticks, and I've been catching a few big ones like that around brush piles and things like that towards the back of creeks. And those fish will kind of get more plentiful as it rolls on here into the winter. On windy days, they'll set up around these shallow points, and you can use your live scope with a jerkbait, this jig, or even a bobber and a minnow, or a bobber and a jig. Just when you get the right depth of those crappie. So some days, I'll see them on my live scope. They'll be swimming around 4 foot of water in open water. And that's one thing that live scope has changed about my crappie fishing, is sometimes these fish are just out in the open. And, we used to, a lot of times they'll be up on windy secondary points. That's when the bobber becomes real effective. You throw it out there with that crappie jig underneath it, and you just let the wind drift it across that point until you contact those fish. Now in the past, we used to kind of look for them on our side imager and find those groups, and then, just drift that crappie jig through there. Now with my live scope from Garmin, I can simply follow these schools around. Sometimes they do circles, sometimes they just swim. And I can just keep on these fish as they're swimming, get cast into the group of those fish, and they're biting. When those crappie are in open water swimming around, they're feeding. So they're really apt to bite. So when I find that, the jerk bait is my favorite bait. For one, you can catch bass on it, which I love to do. So it's a great day when you can go out there and kind of target both species, but it also catches really big ones. So that bite's good, and it's gonna pick up. It gets really good from now into the spring, and it's a great way to catch really big crappie. But for now, target those big boat docks, use the baby shad, try the Pro Striker grub, and you're definitely gonna catch some fish. They're biting out here, and it's a great time to be at the Lake of the Ozarks crappie fishing. So until the next report, good luck to everyone.